Mm.
Hello, John.
Well, what are you doing here, Gary?
Welcome to Wise Fools. You've got John Branyan there. I'm Gary Varvel, and this is not the Bible study you want. It's the Bible study that you need.
It is that. It's been
It's nighttime at where I'm at, and it's
it's
all lit
nighttime
up
where
where
I'm
you
at
are,
too.
but it's
Right.
dark outside. Yeah,
Yeah. In a month or two, it's going to be. We're going
yeah,
to look like we're in different time zones again. Though
yeah, yeah.
it's going to be light at your place, and it's perpetually dark at my place. Um, all right. Shout out to our peeps. Doctors here handing out uh, peanuts and popcorn and baseball
Cracker
related
Jacks and
food items.
yeah.
Um, Nancy's here. Hi, Nancy and Kevin. Um, Jeff Lane. I had lunch with Jeff Lane this week.
Did you
We ate
really?
Mexican food. Yeah, he's
Cool.
got kind of a birthday tradition where he goes and uh, and goes looking for Doctor Who memorabilia. On
Really?
his birthday. Yeah. And so last year he came into Kokomo to go to a comic book store in Kokomo, and we had lunch
Yeah,
together. This is when I first learned about his birthday tradition,
yeah.
and so he went to the comic book store, and apparently the comic book store in Kokomo is pretty lame. Apparently,
Oh,
apparently it's
he
not really
couldn't
worth the
find the
drive.
Doctor Who stuff.
Yeah, and so this year he skipped the comic book store, but he still came to Kokomo to eat lunch with me. So
Oh,
uh,
nice.
yeah, that was nice.
Well,
Hi, Christine.
someone else I know had a birthday this week.
Who?
Me. I had a birthday this week.
Get out of here.
Yeah, I did. It was a big one too. It was
Bigger than norm.
yesterday.
Bigger than
Yeah, it's
usual.
one of those. It's one of those, monuments that you reach, and it's like okay.
Is it
So like
65?
at 16 you can drive, and then 21 you can vote, and I know no you can vote before you can vote
You
when
can
you're
vote.
18.
You can vote at
21.
18. Yeah.
Uh,
You can drink at 21.
you can drink at 21. That's what it was.
You can
And
buy
then
cigarettes too.
so I'm officially on Medicare now. So I just turned 65.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. I think.
Congratulations.
As I told
Uh,
someone else, I really, it's okay. I really preferred an earlier version of me, which was a little better, a little
you
stronger,
know,
little more.
physically, you mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
physically.
Well, I'm going to shout out to everybody else here. Dale.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Dale's
Dale,
here.
Christine's
Christine.
here.
Hi, Jack.
Hi, Jack.
Word Watcher. Hello. Bella Fleur. This is a new name. Hey, welcome.
Yeah,
Uh, Bub Bird is
we've
here
had
tonight. Hey, Bub.
Bub Bird.
Yeah, he goes to
What
my
does he say?
church.
Ray is here. Why is Ray?
Uh,
He says Ray is here.
I haven't seen Ray yet.
No, that says Bub Bird, and it says Ray is here.
Oh, Ray. That's his other name. He goes by a
Oh,
couple of different names. I haven't seen Ray this week, but anyway. So uh, people have asked, if you could go back to an earlier time, if you could go back to your youth, would you
yes.
do it? And they've asked me that question, and I don't think
Hmm.
I would. I mean, I had a great childhood. I
Hmm.
liked being a kid. I liked being a teenager. I had a good high school experience, and there was all of that. It was great,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but I don't know that I want to go back and do it. Do it again. I think there's a lot of cool stuff that's happening right now that I didn't know. I
Oh yeah,
mean,
sure.
some of the most significant people in my life weren't even born when I was in high school.
Right, right.
So,
So I wouldn't want to go
you know,
back there. I wouldn't want to go back that far. But when I was in my 30s and 40s, I had a lot more energy, and now I was still dumb
mhm,
as a brick. So it's taken me
yeah.
a long time to gather some knowledge, and still a lot of people think I'm stupid, but that's all right.
Well, there's
That's
a
okay.
difference. There's a difference between. We could talk about wisdom sometime too. What is that? What's the value of that?
Yeah.
Um, Okay, so they want to know if we should sing. Yeah,
Sing.
well, the only she said, John, you're going to have to do it. You'll have to do it for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will do it entirely. So like everybody would be singing, but I would be the only one that
Together
would
at the same time.
that you
They
would
will
hear.
just be
Yeah,
watching you sing.
that's all. That's all it would be. To be watching me sing, and so I'm not going to do that.
All right, that's good.
But I think that would be
No,
awkward for everybody.
I had a life group at my house on Tuesday nights that we meet, and that group sang to me, so that I've got that out of the way. That's fine.
So it's covered.
It's covered.
Okay.
Yes, I got sang to.
All right. That's all that.
And
matters.
one last thing. I heard the doctor says that if we get 25 people watching tonight, then everybody gets bobbleheads of you and me. Is that true?
That would be awesome. I would love a bobblehead. We've got about we've got a ways to go. We've got about 8 people that we need to add. So some of you are going to
Yeah.
have to open up other devices. Some of you are going to have to get multiple phones going. And so tonight
All right.
is Genesis 28. It's
28.
short. Mm-hmm.
Yes. 22 verses. That would be 11
11
each.
apiece.
I'm not a mathematician, but it sounds about right.
Well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good math for a 65-year-old guy. You just busted that out.
Yeah.
All right, I'll take the first 11,
Okay.
and we'll be on our way. Genesis 28. This is New Living Translation. So Isaac called for Jacob, blessed him, and said, "You must not marry any of these Canaanite women." Here we go. Here we go again. Instead, go at once to Paddan Aram, to the house of your grandfather Bethuel, and marry one of your uncle Laban's daughters. May God Almighty bless you and give you many children, and may your descendants multiply and become many nations. May God pass on to you and your descendants the blessings he promised to Abraham. May you own this land where you are now living as a foreigner, for God gave this land to Abraham. So Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Paddan Aram to stay with his uncle Laban, his mother's brother, the son of Bethuel, the Aramean. Esau knew that his father Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him to Paddan Aram to find a wife, and that he had warned Jacob, "You must not marry a Canaanite woman." He also knew that Jacob had obeyed his parents and gone to Paddan Aram. And it was now very clear to Esau that his father did not like the local Canaanite women. So Esau visited his uncle Ishmael's family and married one of Ishmael's daughters, in addition to the wives he already had. His new wife's name was Mahalath. She was the sister of Nebaioth and the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son. Meanwhile, Jacob left Beersheba and traveled toward Haran. At sundown, he arrived at a good place to set up camp and stopped there for the night. Jacob found a stone to rest his head against and laid down to sleep.
As he slept, he dreamed of a stairway that reached from the earth up to heaven, and he saw the angels of God going up and down the stairway. At the top of the stairway stood the Lord, and he said, "I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of your father Isaac. The ground you are lying on belongs to you. I am giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. They will spread out in all directions, to the west, to the east, to the north, and to the south. And all of the families of the earth will be blessed through you and your descendants. What's more, I am with you, and I will protect you wherever you go. One day I will bring you back to this land, and I will not leave you until I have finished giving you everything I have promised you." Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I wasn't even aware of it." But he was also afraid and said, "What an awesome place this is. It is none other than the house of God, the very gateway to heaven." The next morning, Jacob got up very early. He took the stone that he had rested his head against, and he set it upright as a memorial pillar. And then he poured olive oil all over it, and he named the place Bethel, which means house of God, although it was previously called Luz. Then Jacob made his vow. If God will indeed be with me and protect me on this journey, and he will provide me with food and clothing, and if I return safely to my father's home, then the Lord will certainly be my God. And this memorial pillar I have set up will become a place for worshiping God, and I will present to God a tenth of everything he gives me. So
Hmm.
let's pray. Father, thank you for the reading of your word. I pray that you would help us to see your grace in the text tonight and be able to understand you in a better way. And we ask it in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, well, there we go.
All right, there's some
Jacob's
interesting things
ladder.
in this text.
Hmm.
Interesting things. Again, right off the bat, not happy with the Canaanite women, not
Nope.
impressed.
That is
Ja-
a recurring theme.
Jacob and Rebecca have had enough of them.
We are up to
Um,
here with the Canaanites, those Hittites, whatever you want to call them.
so
Enough.
last week, what we saw was uh, Isaac had promised that he was going to bless Esau if he went and got him some wild game and cooked it for him. His
Right.
wife, Isaac's wife, Rebecca, overhears. She comes up with this scheme. All right, we're going to fake your dad out because you're
Hmm.
supposed to get the blessing instead of your brother, and that's what she does. And then he goes and Jacob, puts hair on him. She cooks the meal, and
Hmm.
Isaac couldn't tell the difference. Now Isaac is blind; he gets fooled. Jacob is the one that actually receives the blessing, but he does it by trickery. Then as soon as he's done, then Esau comes back and realizes what's happened, and he throws a fit and cries about it.
Hmm.
Like he didn't want the birthright beforehand and basically gave it up for a pot of stew, and now all of a sudden he wants it, and he doesn't get he doesn't get blessed, and he's not happy. But now I think this is interesting. So it's like Isaac has finally concluded, okay, yeah, my wife is right, and so I'm gonna really bless Jacob the right way this time. I got tricked the last time, I'm blessing him again. So he blesses him right here, right off the bat. Esau overhears it or watches it or sees it or something.
Hmm.
Now it's interesting to me uh, because they tell Jacob right at the beginning, do not marry these Canaanite women. Esau
Right.
has married two of them, so
Right.
he has two of them, and
Well,
they
that's kind of how
said,
they know what's up with the Hittites.
yeah,
They're
So
like, yeah, we've
and they
got two of them
want
already. How many more do we need
can't take any more of them.
before we can pass judgment on? Yeah.
So they say, go back to your uncle's house in Haram, find him, and he's got to marry some of his daughters. Okay, marry one of his daughters, uh, not knowing he's going to end up with two of them. But I'm going to get
Hmm.
ahead of the story. So Esau watches this, and then he thinks, okay, my parents aren't happy with me because I married these Canaanite women. Hey, I know what I'll do. I'll go marry one of Ishmael's daughters.
Yeah, I'll go marry one of my uncle's daughters and sort of balance everything out.
Yeah, yeah. And
Right.
that just shows a lot of times, that when we start trying to add things to, please God, doing something that he hasn't addressed, when we try to do it our way, for instance, when we were in Genesis chapter 4, so um, Cain and Abel, they bring
Hmm.
sacrifices to the Lord, but Cain brought a grain sacrifice, and God
Hmm.
didn't accept it because he wanted a blood sacrifice, and Cain had a fit about it. But
Hmm.
Cain thought, hey, I want to worship you my way, and we can't worship God our way. It's got to be God's way. God's determined how he would want us to worship. And I think, I kind of see that with Esau here. He's, all of a sudden, okay, I'm going to try to please my parents. I'm going to try to please God. So I'll go marry a relative. Like that's what Jacob's going to do.
I'm speculating here, so this I could be
Okay.
way off base, but I think that Esau was still trying to finagle some kind of a blessing out of his
Yeah,
father.
you're right. Probably. Yeah.
I think that
If he just
this
had the
wasn't
right wife, then
right.
he'd get
I don't
accepted.
think
Yeah.
that this was necessarily an attempt to please God. I think he was just trying uh, to win some points with his parents
Could very well be.
and maybe get a good blessing out of it. Um, but yeah, what what I think is worth noting is throughout the Scripture, the Old Testament, there is the mandate that you're not supposed to be marrying people outside of the
Yeah.
outside of the family, outside of the faith, and
Faith.
I think it's especially interesting that that command was for the men as well as the women. It's like the women are not supposed to be, involved with men, but they didn't really have much choice. Back in those
Hmm.
days, the women were basically they went with whoever they were assigned. They
Yeah.
didn't get to pick, but the men got to pick, and they were told explicitly not to pick
Ex- Except
wives.
for, I was just going to say, except for Isaac, because uh, Abraham's servant went and picked his wife. So Rebecca
Right,
was picked. Isaac didn't see her until all of a sudden she comes back.
right, but he was
But
still
most of the time, yeah,
they still went and got a wife
they
for him.
went. Yeah, they went. Yeah.
Whether or not he picked her personally, it was still the woman went with.
Yeah.
They were distributed like like property. Um, but I still think it's interesting. This is the patriarchy. This is the
Hmm.
patriarchy that supposedly is so oppressive and so unfair and so brutalized women and abused them that God is still saying no. You shouldn't have women who are not believers. You shouldn't be
Hmm.
connected to women who are not believers. Why would that be if the men were going to subjugate them? If they were going to be oppressed and do whatever the husband said, if the husband really ruled the roost, then why were they not allowed to have unbelieving wives? Because they were going to bring them into the family and make them into believers. But God knows that it doesn't work that way. Like when you've got an unbelieving wife, she's really kind of in charge, and the family goes in the direction that the wife says. That's even what happened with Abraham. It
Hmm.
was Sarah that came along and said, "Hey, here's Hagar. Why don't you take her?"
Hmm.
And we'll get this family. We'll pop out a son, and we'll get things rolling. That was the wife's idea, and
Hmm.
so I think there's some we don't like to talk about it, but in many ways, even in the Old Testament time, when the father figure was the ruler of the roost, he really wasn't, because
Hmm.
if he was,
Well,
then it wouldn't matter who he married.
especially with the children, because children really learn, especially when they're younger, learn so much from their mom. Uh,
Hmm.
the influence of the mother over, especially spiritual things, because they spend most of their time with the children when they're younger. It's not probably till they're older that they spend more time. Now they can help dad go hunt or plant or shepherd the flock, that kind of thing. But especially in those early years are so critical. One of the things, and I'm skipping ahead in the text here, but I found this kind
What?
of interesting, and then we'll come back. Um, Look at verse 20. I think it's interesting what Jacob says here. Jacob says, "Then Jacob made this vow: If God will indeed be with me, protect me on this journey, and if he will provide me with food and clothing, and if I return safely to my home." Now he's making a lot of demands here. "Then the Lord will certainly be my God." Now
Right.
that doesn't sound like a spiritual man who has, been, and we don't, since he's been born in the text, we haven't seen him pray. Abraham was a man who prayed to God. Isaac, we have an example of him praying, but we
Right.
don't, up until this point, we don't have Jacob praying. And one of the things it says to me is that even when we're out of the will of God, God's grace is sufficient to draw us to him. And I think, in this case, uh, it's critical. Jacob's gotten the blessing. He's going to be the patriarch here. There's going to be 12 tribes come out of this guy. And
Hmm.
so he needs to be following the Lord. But the Lord really blesses him by giving him this dream. It kind of gets his attention with this dream of the stairway. And of course, anytime I see this this story, I always think of Stairway to Heaven. You know,
So do I.
the rock and roll.
Hmm.
But go to John chapter 1.
Led
If you look
Zeppelin,
at John,
man.
I
One of the
know. Look at
greatest.
John chapter 1, though. John chapter 1, verse 51.
I tell you the truth, you shall see heaven open and angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man.
Yeah, so the story in John 1, um, I'm not there yet. Who is it that brings, there we go.
Who does what?
Who brings Nathaniel? Who brings Nathaniel to the Lord?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask who sings "Stairway to Heaven."
No,
It's
no.
Leonard Skinner. I just said that.
You already did it. Led
Or
Zeppelin.
Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin, not Leonard Skinner.
Robert Plant, right? That's his name.
Uh-huh.
All right. So, and let's see. I'm trying to find this. Philip, is it Philip? Yeah.
Yeah.
So Philip brings Nathaniel,
Right.
and
That's
he
what's
tells him
happening earlier.
we found the Lord. Now, verse 46, this is Nathaniel says, Nazareth, can anything good come from Nazareth? So he's on, that's kind of a shock. That's like, you could pick a place in America that you think, oh, nothing comes from there.
Yeah.
I
I love this passage. This whole exchange is one of my favorites.
Yeah, this is great. So then verse 47, as they approached Jesus, Jesus said, now here is a genuine son of Israel, a man of complete integrity.
Right.
Now, how do you know about me? Nathanael asked. Jesus replied, I could see you under the fig tree before Philip found you. Then Nathanael exclaimed, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, the King of Israel. Jesus asked him, do you believe just because I told you I had seen you under the fig tree?
Right.
You will see greater things than this. Then he said,
Right.
I will tell you I tell you the truth, you will all see heaven open and the angels of God going up and down on the Son of Man, the one who is the stairway between heaven and earth. So now Jesus identifies, and this is a picture of what Jacob experienced. He's identifying himself as being the way to heaven. I think that's powerful. But I don't know if you saw the TV show The Chosen, but the episode where they had Nathaniel had a building that fell down. He was supposed to be, this is all extra biblical. We're not told what he was praying or talking about to God under the fig tree. But in the show, they show him alone under the fig tree, and he's praying, and he's, pretty much he's just kind of venting to God. And so then when he shows up, and Jesus says, I saw you under the fig tree. Well, there was no one else around him. He was completely alone. And that amazed him that he would have known he was under a fig tree specifically. So it's pretty powerful scene. I really enjoyed that scene. It was good.
Yeah. I've had a slightly different vision for how this plays out. I think this is what I like about this passage in John is it's the way guys would talk to each other. It's like we found Moses, the one who and Nathaniel says Nazareth. What can anything good come from Nazareth? That's a joke. He's dissing Nazareth. And Philip says, "Well, just come and see." And then Jesus saw Nathanael, and he said, "Well, look, here comes a true Israelite, in whom there is nothing false." That's a shot. He's saying, "Look at this. Here comes an honest Jew," is what he's saying.
That's pretty good. I think it's interesting that you draw those two connections. That's excellent. Especially when you recognize, when you tie together what Nathaniel just said, he was making fun of Nazareth.
Nathaniel is a smart aleck, and Jesus knew that, and so he spoke to him the same way he spoke his language. Nathaniel says, "How do you know me?" He says, "I saw you while you were standing under the fig tree." And
that's great.
And then Nathaniel says, "You are the Son of God." And then Jesus I think this is a little sarcastic too. He says, "You
Yeah.
believe me because I said I saw you standing under a fig tree. You're going to see greater things than that.
Yeah.
Hang
Right.
on to your
Right.
hat, pal. If that impresses you, stick
Yeah.
around."
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
All right. Back to Genesis 28.
Yeah. Well, you brought up that there are a lot of ifs in verse 20.
Yeah.
If indeed the Lord will protect me, and if he will provide me with food and clothing, and if I return safely to my father's home. I I think that I can kind of relate to that. I think I can kind of relate to that point of view. Because as you said, Jacob has already been told that he is going to be the father of, you know, there's going to have as many descendants as there is dust on the earth.
Yeah.
So that's the promise. But we've talked about this before. It's We need a lot of assurance. I need a lot of assurance,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
God can tell me today this is what's going to happen, and I'm going to need Him to remind me again tomorrow because
Hmm.
I don't have very solid faith, and
Hmm.
I think that this is kind of like when Gideon put a fleece out when he said
Hmm.
to God,
Sure.
I think this is what I'm supposed to get from you, but I'm going to put a fleece out, and if this is right, then do this. And
Hmm.
he did it a couple of times. I think Jacob was kind of saying, well, if I make this trip, and if I'm provided for, and if I come back safely, then I know. I mean, he says that then this will be my God, but I've sort of
Hmm.
interpreted that as, well, then I'll know that what I think is correct, and God is with me, and
Hmm.
He's going to do this thing.
I think another thing that strikes me as you were talking there is thinking about how God sees us as we can be instead of the way we are. So, like in the
Right.
case of Gideon, Gideon's hiding because he's afraid, and
Mm-hmm.
the Lord speaks to him and says, "Man of valor." He says, "What? What? Are
Right.
you kidding me?
Right.
I'm scared to death here." And so, and Gideon required as some kind of proof, and God gives it to him. Now, the Bible also says we shouldn't tempt the Lord. Uh,
Yeah, that's what
but anyway, so that's
Jack Wife
good.
said.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I don't even know what that means. Quite honestly, I
what?
don't know what it says to tempt the Lord. Well, I guess when
To
Jesus
tempt the
was
Lord.
up on the top of the temple, and Satan said, "Go ahead and jump off,
Yeah,
and God will
yeah,
protect you," and he said, "You're not supposed to tempt God," and
yeah,
maybe
right.
that's or putting the Lord. You're not supposed to put the
Well,
Lord
putting
your
the
God to
Lord
the
to a
test.
test. Yeah,
And
right.
so I don't know what you would. I've always thought that was, when it came to tempting God, I'm not sure how you would actually. I don't know how you would do that,
Well, I think that's
unless
what
it's
you. I think you covered it right there. What it is where you demand of God to do this or that, and then I'll
hmm
believe you. You do that.
right.
We're not in a position to be making demands on the Lord. I mean, He's the one, unless He asks us for, um, you know, ask me for something and see if I don't do it. I'm thinking about the case of was it King Ahab or King, what is his name? Not Ahab. That's not him. Um, it's in the book of Isaiah, and Isaiah goes and tells the king, and he's a wicked king. It's Jezebel, and what's her husband's name?
Ahab, right?
Okay, so yeah, so he tells
Yeah.
him, uh, "Ask of the Lord, and He will show you." And the king says, "I'm not going to test the Lord," and says, "Oh well, since you're testing him by he's saying I'll show you, just ask for something, and now you're
Right.
testing him because you say you don't want to test
Because you're
him.
not going to
So
test him.
He will
Yeah.
show you a sign," and then he says, "He will show you a sign: the virgin will give birth and bear a son." And so he basically tells, and that's the verse. What is it? Isaiah
Right.
chapter 7.
Well, I
So
think maybe we have a different
yeah, it's Ahab.
a different understanding of what the word tempted means um, than the way it's being used. If you're, yeah, if you're tempting God, if you're demanding, like I think about the atheists who shake their fist at God and say, show yourself to me, send me a sign. If you're
Right.
You know, I'm not going to
Right.
believe in you until you spell my name in the stars or something like that. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Right.
yeah, God has that is kind of that's tempting God or it, but it's not
Hmm.
the same. I don't know what we could do that would tempt God, you know, to do, because we that word for me means that you are enticed, you have the urge to do something that you ought not to do. And I
Hmm.
just don't know, I don't know how you God could have the urge to do something
No, I
that would be
I
not right
think
to
what
do.
I think maybe the better word is test. Don't test
Right.
God. Don't tell him, okay, this is what I want you to do. We
Right.
have very few instances in the Old Testament where, like Gideon says, I need some proof here.
Right.
But, usually God says, I will prove it to you by this will happen. In the case of Samuel, when he tells Saul that he's going to be the king, Samuel was from the tribe of Benjamin, smallest
Hmm.
tribe, and and Saul's family were a bunch of nobodies, even though he was a big, tall guy.
Right.
But Samuel tells him, "This is how the Lord will confirm it for you. When you go down this hill, you're going to see this and this, and this is going to happen." And it all happened the way you said it was going to happen. So
Right.
that proved to Saul that he was going to be king. Um, anyway, but now we get back to Jacob's dream at Bethel. Uh, Bethel, which means house of God. But
House
there was
of
no
God.
church there. There was no synagogue there. There was no temple. There was just nothing. But
Hmm.
the house of God, Bethel, is wherever you and God are communing. And so in this case, he lays down there to go to sleep, and God meets with him and speaks to him. And so that's why he set that up as pretty much an altar there. This is
Hmm.
where we will worship the Lord here, because
If
God
I
had
make
made
it
that a
back
place a
alive.
holy place. Yeah, if he makes it back alive. Um,
Yeah.
so that was quite a dream he had. This stairway, and then there's angels going up and down. Um, and then the confirmation to him was the same thing that God had told Abraham, in that your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. They will spread out in all directions, and your all the families of the earth will be blessed through you. That was the same blessing that God had given to
To Abraham.
Abraham. So
Right.
and then
Well,
Jacob
and that would make
awoke.
sense, right? It would make sense because
Sure, yeah,
it is
because
the
that's
same
the
blessing.
blessing. It's
It
the
is the
same
same
blessing,
blessing. Yeah.
right?
It's Abraham's grandson, so it's the same blessing.
Yes. One of the thoughts that I had here, because it says here in verse 18, the next morning Jacob got up early, took the stone that he had rested his head against, and he set it upright as a memorial, a pillar, and he poured olive oil over it. Oil in the Bible represents the Holy Spirit. He
Hmm.
named that place Bethel, which means house of God, although it previously was called Luz. So a couple of things here, a couple of thoughts. One, when something big happens in your family, uh, it's good to put up a memorial and then teach your children about it. So this is what God did for our family, and they need to know. I think it builds faith in them, and they can see a string, down through the ages. So, like my parents, the story of them meeting. Uh, my dad was riding a bus back and forth to from Indianapolis to Greencastle, and he was saving up money. He was working, he was saving up money to buy a car. The next day, he's going to buy a car. This is his last trip on the bus, and he sees a girl sitting in a seat by herself. Asks if he could sit down. Before he gets to Greencastle, he has a date with her. He never rides the bus again, and that was my mom. 3 months later, they're married. They were married for 62 years, and I wouldn't be here if there wasn't an empty seat next to her. If just the timing of that is perfect. Uh, and so when we talk to our, so
So
I
your
have
father poured oil over that bus seat.
no, No, he didn't. But it became a memorial in that, the story gets told to me, then I tell it to our children, and we'll continue to tell that to our grandchildren. But uh, just to show them, and it's also confirmation of Acts 17:26 and 27. In time past, that God made every nation from one man, and he chose the exact places and times in which everyone would live. And he did this so that they might seek him. And if they seek him, they'll find him, because he's not far from each one of us. Now, that's the sovereignty of God. And I just, it's fascinating to me to think of how things work. I had a job interview for a job in San Diego in 2001. And so told our kids that I got a job interview. We might be moving to San Diego. And they were devastated. They didn't want to go.
Right.
And, but, hey.
And rightly so. Who
living
wants
there.
to live in California?
Yeah. Exactly. But we just have to trust in the Lord, And so I didn't get the job. And Steve Breen got that job. But God didn't want me to go there because he kept me here. And my 3 children all married their high school sweethearts. If we're in San Diego, then they don't have the spouses they have now.
If you're in San Diego, they're going to marry Canaanite women in San Diego.
Exactly. See, and the Lord didn't want us to go to Canaan. He wanted
all
to
those
keep
Hittites
us here.
running around in California.
Exactly my point. Mm-hmm. So there we go. But those are the kinds of things, when you see the Lord work in your family, you need to communicate that, and it should be a memorial in that you tell them about it. We talk about it from time to time. It becomes kind of a thing for our family. See, but it's all a great point. Focused on the God.
That is a great point. There is a real lack of tradition. We don't know how to do traditions anymore in our culture. We don't value them, and a lot of it is because we're so rapidly changing relationships, and everything just moves so fast, and there's no loyalty to a particular tribe or place. We're not loyal to any jobs. We're not loyal to churches. We're not loyal to each other within our families, and so we don't establish traditions. Partially, I think, because those are going to be reminders of things. They're going to be painful reminders, like it would be if your parents hadn't been married for 62 years, then the story of them meeting would not be as wouldn't be as special. Right. Yeah, it wouldn't. They wouldn't tell that story. If they had gotten divorced and married other people, then that story of them meeting on the bus would have not been. It wouldn't have meant anything. Really, it was just that's how I met my first wife. Yeah.
One other point too, I think, is that if you are focusing on if you got to be looking for what's God doing in our lives, what's He done. If you're not looking for Him, you won't see Him. You won't see those kinds of things happen. It's like for instance, I'm thinking of the book of Esther. So God's not mentioned in the book of Esther, but if you really look at it, God's all over that. In fact, the only mention, I guess, is when Mordecai tells Esther. He says, "Look, who's to know, but that maybe you were born for such a time as this. And if you won't do it,
then someone else.
Then the Lord will, someone else would be. Someone else would be raised up to do it."
Yeah.
But recognizing those moments, those God moments, where obviously He's doing something, and then communicating that, those are last Tuesday night when we were having our life group here. One of the things we looked at was Jehoshaphat's prayer, and in Jehoshaphat's prayer, I think it's 2 Chronicles. And this happens a lot of times in the Old Testament. When they start to pray, they praise God, and then they praise Him for all of the things that He did for them in the past. They get really historical. You are the one who brought us out of Egypt and brought us out of slavery, and you're the ones who fed us in the desert, and you were the one. And so they they remind, and I think that should be a message to us to remind our family of this very same thing. So I thought that was kind of cool when I came to that he sets up a memorial there, and we're still talking about it today.
Yeah, I agree. Also, I'm just making. I always make fun of California, Jeff. It's not anything you need to take personally.
Anything
He
good
knows
can
that.
come from San Diego.
Can anything good come from San Diego? Actually, Brian April is also out in San Diego. He's a good
I
friend
think
of
I
mine.
saw.
So,
I thought I saw Ray Bates earlier say something about Californianites. Oh, it's hijack wife. Stay away from those Californites.
mm-hmm. And it's bad news. Yeah, I would agree that there's some value in having traditions, and one of the things, one of the ways that manifests itself in our family is with inside jokes. We've got
Yes. Oh yeah.
jokes and one-liners that we throw around that are hilarious to us, but they mean nothing to people outside of the family because
Yeah. Yeah.
that some of them go back years.
Right.
Nicknames that my
Yep.
daughter Tabby has for her younger brother Andrew. There's a story behind
Uh-huh.
all of that, and
Uh-huh.
yeah, those things they're important. They matter because
They
they not
are.
only
They.
serve as reminders, but they also have a way of sort of bringing the family together because we
They're.
all have a
Yeah.
role that we play in these stories and these
Yep.
memories, and so when we get together and we talk about it, everybody
Yeah.
has their little part.
Right.
Everybody has their little joke.
Yeah, it becomes the glue that keeps the family together, pulls us together. We, like you said, we're all an integral part, and nobody's being left out. So we all have
Mhm.
kind of a thing that's our thing. Yeah, that's good. We have a little tradition in our family that, and I can't remember how I even started it, or how they even got started. It's just been around so long, and we actually put it in The War Within. If you see the movie The War Within, which
Mhm.
our family worked hard on and to produce, and Brett and I wrote together, but we put in there, "Don't forget," and the little phrase "Don't forget" means "Don't forget I love you." And so a lot of
Right.
times we'll just say, and now with the grandkids say it, they'll say it to me. They'll get ready to leave our house and they'll say, "Hey, don't forget." I said, "Yeah, I love you too."
Mhm. Yeah, all
Yeah,
of
so
those.
those kinds of things, exactly. That's what
You're
we're
just
talking
saying be
about.
conscious of those things. Just
Yes,
be
exactly.
cognizant
Yeah,
of those
look for
things
them.
and appreciate
Yeah,
them for their value.
yeah.
Yep.
I used to have a pastor who used to say that you'll be shocked at the opportunities there are to witness if you're looking for them. But you're going to have to be looking for them. A lot of times, if you're not paying attention, if you're just focused on the horizontal, all of a sudden something happens, and you think, and later on you'll start remember that conversation. Oh, I
Right.
probably should have probably moved that conversation into some spiritual area here, and I just completely spaced out because I wasn't looking for it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
All right. Let's see. It seems like there was some other vitally important point that I wanted to make, and now I don't remember what it was.
no, I'm sorry.
Well, I think we already talked about it. The thing about Esau I thought was interesting that he was, he wanted to go and he picked up a wife from Ishmael's family, and I think that was an effort to try to appease his parents.
Yeah, so let's look at that verse again because I think it's interesting um, what he says here. Okay, verse 6. All right, Esau knew his father Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent
Mhm.
him to Paddan Aram to find a wife, and that he had warned Jacob, "You must not marry a Canaanite woman." He also knew that Jacob had obeyed his parents. Oh, so Jacob had obeyed his parents and gone to
Mhm.
Paddan Aram. It was now clear. Now listen. It was now clear to Esau that his father did not like the local Canaanite women. Wait a
Mhm.
minute. You just now figured that out?
Yeah, Esau wasn't necessarily the brightest bulb in the
like
string.
3 or 4 chapters ago, it ends with the chapter ends with, and that Esau's Canaanite women made Isaac and Rebekah miserable.
Right.
And then the next chapter, the very last verse, says something very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took him several chapters to figure this out. This would have been years and years.
Yeah.
So he married those two.
We knew that
he married those
didn't
two
like
women when he married those two women when he was 40. And now we don't know how many years have passed since then, but so they're in the 40s, I imagine, when Jacob leaves to go find a wife. Oh, one more thing too I wanted to point out in the last verse. And this memorial pillar I have set up will become a place for worshiping God. And listen to this, and I will present to God a tenth of everything he gives me. Now, this is before the law. There's been no law given about giving a tithe to the Lord. That happens later with Moses, but here it is another time. So Abraham gave a tenth after winning a battle. He gave a tenth to Melchizedek. But here we have it again. And so before the law was set up, the principle was that if God has blessed you, then you bless the Lord back with at least a tenth.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's another tradition, maybe.
I get choked.
That's being established, and they are carrying it forward. But yeah, that is, and I wonder what that looked like. You know, when you're going to give, he's going to give a tenth of everything that he has to the Lord. What does that actually look like? Is it in the form of sacrifices? Is it in the form of some sort of charity? I mean, how do you give 10% of your stuff to God? I don't know.
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know what they were using for money, or I thought they usually just bartered stuff. You know, I'll give you some sheep for what I want.
Right.
But in the case of Melchizedek, I mean, they came back with stuff because they
gave it to another person. I'm talking about how you.
But they gave it. But
God.
they gave that stuff to Melchizedek. Yeah, right.
How you would give it directly to God would be.
I don't know.
And that's still a challenge in my mind.
Yeah.
You know, when I'm talking about rendering things to God, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what is God's. And it always puts me in a quandary, and makes me go, okay, what belongs to God? Everything actually belongs to God. Everything.
Right.
Everything belongs to God already.
We belong to God.
Yeah. So how do you give it to?
But now in the New Testament, they were to bring it to the priest, and that was how the priest made a living, because they didn't work jobs, they didn't have land. Their job was to worship and to lead the people in worship and make the sacrifices for the sins of the people, and so that's how they got paid.
Well,
and today,
there was so much sacrifice. That's the thing that I get. You know, I understand that you had the Levites that was in tribe, and there wasn't just a handful of priests. There were thousands of them, and they were constantly doing. You know, they were sacrificing. They were constantly busy doing. Keeping the wrath of God from destroying Israel. That was their full-time job, and they got paid from the offerings that were brought to God. And so
now, when we were in the book of Acts, and the Apostle Paul was going on his missionary journeys, there were people who were giving to him. You know, so that, and if he ran short, then he started working on making tents, because he was a tent maker, and that's how he made ends meet. But then, you know, every once in a while, some people would give him money so he could get passage and food to the next place.
They took up an offering for some of the church people too.
Yeah,
they took up an offering for the church in Jerusalem, and that was the churches
they were under persecution.
Right, in Acacia they did that, and so that's an interesting thing that took place too, because you got the apostles who were taking up an offering for the church people. So you've got the evangelists who are taking an offering and giving it back to the people in the church. And normally it's the other way around. We think of the church people taking up an offering and giving it to the evangelists, but this went the other direction.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So
Well, I guess
Um,
that's it.
that's it.
We got done early, but I mean, it's a short chapter. Next week is an interesting text in chapter 29. Jacob gets more than he bargained for, and also the guy who is a conniver and a cheater, he gets cheated. And
Always like to see that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a interesting chapter
What
next
you
week.
sow, you will also reap, and he will reap.
That is an interesting thing to discuss. We'll cross that bridge next week. But I've got a couple thoughts about that. I've got a
Yeah.
couple thoughts about whatsoever you plant, you shall also reap,
Mhm.
and how that doesn't always happen. It seems like there are sometimes people reap things that they didn't sow, and it makes you wonder, why do the wicked prosper?
Right, right. So, but
And then,
the principle of the harvest is that you reap more than you sow, you reap later than you sow,
mhm.
and what's the other one? There's another one, I think. I'm sure Jeff Lane knows it. More and later, and
give him give him a second. There's a
but
delay.
yeah. But the principle of the harvest, I'll have it ready for next week. It
All
slipped my
right.
mind.
We'll
Okay.
cover that, and I also want to talk a little bit about the idea of karma, which is the culture's concept of how that all
Yeah,
works. Um,
they've given it a different name, but yeah,
well, I don't think they're right either. But
I don't think they
uh,
are either.
thanks for joining us. We didn't make it to 25 tonight, so I don't think we get a bobbleheads, but I appreciate the thought.
That's good. I
All
don't
right,
know what I'd
everybody.
look like as a bobblehead. I don't know.
You look
I'd
like
be
this.
white hair. Yeah.
Yeah. See
Thanks,
everybody next
John.
week.